Here's the roster that we'll see in the month of June for the Canadian men's national team. June 5th, the friendly against Iran. June 9th, June 13th, Curacao, Honduras. That's in CONCACAF Nations League. And what are we looking for from this Canadian men's team, given that they had an excellent World Cup qualifying campaign, finished top of the standings, qualified for the first time for the World Cup since 1986? What do you want to see in June?
Well, I think what stands out about this roster is that there's only two players who are either new or returning after a lengthy period out. Two players that didn't participate in World Cup qualifying, right? And that's Raheem Edwards and then the youngster from Espanyol, Luca Calacho. So that tells you, I think, what John Herdman is going to be targeting in this window. I thought maybe there would be a bit more experimentation, particularly in those two Nations League games. Clearly, that's not going to be the case. This is now about playing your last few games before you go to the World Cup in the winter, and really focusing in on the core of this team, continuing to develop the core of this team. And obviously, I think the crucial match in this window is the one against Iran, and that opportunity to play somebody outside of CONCACAF and a very competitive team.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
It's go time. When I saw the 25-man squad, it just gave me a lift today. Alphonso Davies for the first time in 2022. All the big dogs are there. There are some injuries to Liam Miller. Ismail Kone left out. Liam Fraser left out. But overall, this is a strong side. Andy, really in earnest, unless things change, there's only 5 games, friendly or competitive games, between now and the World Cup. I think John needs to figure out if he hasn't already, who is 16, 17 players who he's going to lean on in this competition. You don't need 23 players when you go to a World Cup with ample time and rest between games, Ollie. You need to lean on like a small core group of players. They need to figure out which other players mix in, are going to do the little things right, be leaders in the group, keep morale up. And I think that's what these camps are really to kind of experiment with.
So what do you think he'd be looking from a Calacho? Well,
Luca Calacho certainly is a player for the future, but I think there's a little bit of now to it as well. This is a 17-year-old player, a dual national. My understanding is that the U.S. men's national team was calling him, and part of the arrangement, him joining up with the Canadian men's national team, is that he wouldn't play with the under-20s. He's going to only be at the Canadian camp for 7 days. He's returning early to Espanyol in order to work towards preseason and try to become a regular in the Espanyol squad for this upcoming season. He came on, made his debut on the final game week of the season, a big moment for a 17-year-old Canadian. And it's a player that, if he establishes himself as a regular in a La Liga side, then that player is good enough to play in a Canadian men's national team. And he was on the radar. He's been on the radar. Herdman's pushed. And the fact that he rejected the U.S. call and is now coming to the Canadian camp, I think it's a small win for John Herdman and company.
It's another one where you maybe feel a bit of a battle coming, right? He's born in the U.S. He's played for the U.S. youth teams. He's in La Liga, albeit just a cameo off the bench. But at the age he's at, that's impressive in itself. He's a player who I think is probably going to be pretty sought after.
We have time for another name that possibly stood out to you.
Well, it's the absence of Stefan Mitrovic, right? And I think it's a player that a lot of people were expecting to see on the roster. He's had a very impressive season in Serbia in terms of the goals he's been able to score as a 19-year-old there. There's rumored to be interest in him from other clubs around Europe, but he has been called up by the Serbia under-21 team. So again, it's about, where is the player's mind in that respect in terms of who he wants to represent?
I feel like the perception of Mitrovic is maybe bigger than the reality here. He was invited into Canada's January camp. He had only originally agreed to come into the camp for 6 days and refused to go through the change of association, leaving that door open for Serbia. When the Canadian camp re-engaged with his people over the course of this winter just to kind of hear him out or feel it out, he still is refusing to go through a change of association. And my understanding is, just in terms of the depth chart, he was below an Edwards and Brim coming into camp anyways. And if you go further down, some of the players that were left out, Corbinu, even Jaden Nelson, my understanding that he's lower on the depth chart than those players as well. So I think the player needs to do a lot more to establish himself. And if he's wishy-washy on committing to Canada, that will probably leave him on the outside looking in, at least for now. Could maybe turn into a player, but it's too early to tell.
Again, powerful team, as we saw in qualifiers. Players who do want to play for the team, those are the ones you bring in. So looking forward to them getting back on the pitch June 5th.